Discussion and possible action making recommendations and remedies to address election challenge 23 submitted by Stuart Miller for April 7, 2000 Studio City Neighborhood Council election. Reason of challenge: electioneering by candidates. Go ahead, sir.
After what we've just been through, this is going to be blessed and short.
Thank you.
The chair of this panel a few minutes ago made a point that I'm going to underscore. Rules are rules. And everybody who was involved in this election knew or had access to what the rules were. And so far as electioneering is concerned, in this specific case, two candidates that I've named significantly violated, willfully and almost violently, the rule about electioneering, meaning candidates could only, at the polling place, appear, vote, and leave, and remain at least 100 feet away from the entrance to the polls. These two candidates, and some others that I couldn't identify by name, clearly violated that. There are plenty of witnesses. I named 5, later discovered that apparently in this agenda that only 3 of them would be accepted, and we ended up getting 4, so I don't know which of the witness statements that I provided has been made part of the record. But let me just say this one more time. Rules are rules. Either Dunn and the city clerk and this panel and every neighborhood council in the city is going to agree to that and obey it, or we have grounds for chaos and anarchy, and we might as well not even waste our time. Thank you.
All right, Jane.
Okay, so this is challenge number 23 brought on by Stuart Miller. And the challenge is for electioneering. And there are some witness statements attached. He says, I hereby challenge the Studio City Neighborhood Council election. I personally witnessed prohibited electioneering by candidates Eric Previn and Patrice Berlin and others I cannot identify in and around the polling place, including the room where votes were actually cast during the time the poll was open, and that it was carried out at such a high level of volume and intensity that the supervisor of the election proceedings, Mr. Stephen Box, had to attempt to remove them from the polling place with equally loud shouts and language. That said, it appeared that several stakeholders waiting in line became disgruntled and intimidated by the outburst and left the building without voting. The witness statements pretty much mirror the statement made by the gentleman, talking about how one candidate lingered inside the polling place talking with people, including a police officer stationed between the registration table and the entrance to the paper ballot room. Anyone voting by paper ballot would have had to pass her after checking in at the registration table. She was Patrice Berlin. After her presence became quite noticeable, I notified Dunn staff, Tom Sung, as I recall, at the registration table that she was a candidate and shouldn't be there. Eric Previn made quite a scene at the registration table, drawing the attention of everyone in the area and causing disruption by his loud and boisterous behavior. He then proceeded to the online voting room. I heard raised voices coming from the room and then saw Previn exit the room, making another scene, waving his arms and shouting angrily. Dunn staff, Gracie Lou, as I recall, took him aside to handle the situation. And then the other candidate, Mr. Patrick Lewis, was in the polling place a number of times. When he first came to my attention, he was at the registration table explaining that he thought he'd mistakenly voted for the other Patrick Lewis, and Dunn staff addressed him, and I recall there were several more times, the last time with the passport, and eventually voting and placing a ballot in the ballot box, and then I gave him a sticker. Second person, Heidi, her statement talks about the experience being very hostile and argumentative, and I don't feel as if my opinion or vote mattered to the people running the polls. From the moment I parked the car, I made my way towards the front entrance. There were numerous candidates that appeared to be electioneering. Once I made my way inside of the polling hall at Walter Reed School was a very congested environment filled with people that did not appear to be volunteers. It was very loud and confusing. Once I was allowed to enter the polling room, I attempted to sign in, was told I could not vote for anything except being an at-large Studio City resident. As I showed my driver's license for the second time, I finally convinced 3 separate people that I'm a Studio City resident and a renter. There was an attitude projected because I was a renter and not a homeowner, and they made it abundantly clear I was not allowed to vote in a category besides renter and at large. I understood this, accepted it, had to show my gas bill for my home address to be allowed the voting forms, but the hostility and arrogance was abundant. There was a tremendous amount of confusion and noise throughout. Additionally, by showing my Southern California gas bill, it doesn't notate if I'm a renter or a homeowner, therefore I could have been dishonest, said I was a homeowner and voted for the representative of the homeowners group. There's one from James Kellum, Grievance. The following information contained here, my personal knowledge. While I was trying to vote in a polling place on April 7th, my way was blocked by several candidates in the hallway and in the electronic voting room, loudly declaring their status as candidates. Both before and after they voted, I felt uncomfortable and left without voting. The department has reviewed the challenges, and the department makes the recommendation to the election challenge panel to dismiss the challenge for the following reasons. No electioneering by candidates. The candidates, Eric Previn and Patrice Berlin, that Mr. Miller alleges conducted electioneering, did not, as they were only complaining in the polls about process issues or speaking and passing to voters, unknowing what the conversation actually was, which is allowable and does not meet the administrative code definition for electioneering, which is in the body of this response. It's Administrative Code 815, notated as electioneering. No person shall do any electioneering, solicit a vote, or speak to a voter on the subject of marking the voter's ballot on election day within 100 feet of the entrance to the polling place, location where the voters are voting, or an elections official's office. This includes the audible dissemination of information that advocates for or against candidates or a measure on the ballot, nor shall any vehicle that has a banner or place card soliciting a vote or recommending any candidate or measure remain within 100 feet of the entrance to the polling location. And then it goes on to say a display of a candidate's name, likeness, or logo, display of a ballot measures, number, title, subject, or logo, or buttons, hats, pens, shirts, signs, and stickers. This is the actual city elections electioneering code. It is not illegal for a candidate to come in and complain that there's a problem and come to an election manager. It is not illegal. It is not electioneering if a candidate comes into the location and is not trying to steer people into voting a certain way and telling them how to vote and how to mark their ballot. And the last thing I will say is in city elections, municipal elections, there is only one remedy for electioneering, and it is not dismiss the candidate. In city elections, the city clerk's rules, if you are electioneering, course of action is you're asked to leave the poll. If you don't leave the poll, the course of action is to ask you again to leave the poll. And the third course of action, if you're electioneering and you haven't left a poll, is to advise them you're calling LAPD, who will remove you from the poll. There is no disqualification for electioneering if there's actual electioneering. The remedy is remove them from the poll by administrative code, and that again is under Administrative Code 815 of the city's rules on elections. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a rebuttal to that?
Well, I must admit I'm not familiar with that reference, so I will accept it as read. I can only comment, it's a very narrow definition of electioneering when people like the candidates that I mentioned, particularly the gentleman, can be inside the polling place disrupting the calm and peaceful and efficient and professional conduct of the election and face no consequence other than the possibility that if they go too far, LAPD will escort them off the premises. I'm slightly amused because I spent a good deal of time standing next to and talking with the senior lead officer for North Hollywood, who was at the poll and keeping an eye on things, and in fact witnessed some of the very behavior that I challenged. But
John's manual says the remedy is.
Okay, quick question.
well, I'm sorry, wait. I've just been given something, I still have a little more time. This is under the heading of challenge remedies. If a challenge is found to be valid, remedies will be narrowly interpreted to affect only the voters, candidates, or seats affected. Redoing the entire neighborhood council election is not a rule. I wasn't asking for that. Remedies can include, but are not limited to, letters of correction/reprimand, disqualification of candidates or voters, neighborhood council funding penalties, and referral to the city attorney's office for criminal prosecution. So I'm not asking for anything other than disqualification, and
It's allowed.
it seems that it is allowed.
All right, quick question.
Therefore, I challenge the interpretation of my challenge.
You're Stuart Miller, right?
I am.
Is Judy Price here?
No, she was unable to come.
No.
Is Heidi Holliker?
No.
Unable
No.
to.
Is James
None of
Kevin?
my witnesses are here because none of them were asked to come, and I didn't know I should invite them.
All right,
I
is
didn't
James
feel like
Rucker
you
here?
could.
Right,
Pardon me?
we were
James
told it
Rucker.
was just the written statements that
Right.
would be allowed.
Jane Gardner's not here.
All right, I know, I'm just going by the written statements, but the written statements have things in them that I need to ask questions
And did you get Judy Price's statement?
about. Yep, we've got everybody's.
Great.
So. So I'm reading the same piece of paper, and this is still my question time. I'm reading the same piece of paper you do. And there's, what Jay represents is what you represent. There's this piece of paper that we were given, which is the done elections manual, which I'm pretty sure is what we're supposed to be following here. We're not the city attorney. Election challenges, what's challengeable, what's not challengeable. Electioneering is challengeable. Voter intimidation is not challengeable. A lot of what you're describing is voter intimidation. A lot of what's in here is voter intimidation. So that's why I want to ask.
Well, you can take all the voter intimidation language out and.
Right, but
Still
and I'm
challenge.
trying to do justice by what you've submitted, meaning that there are people named. Patrice Berlin is mentioned, Eric Grievance is mentioned, Patrick Lewis is mentioned. They are mentioned as essentially doing voter intimidation.
Dimension is what?
Electioneering.
No, they're mentioned in these statements as being loud and obnoxious and not
Stating
meeting.
their candidacy.
No, but let me finish. Let me finish what I'm saying. They are listed in this piece of paper I'm holding in my hand, which you've all seen, as being obnoxious, being physically there and being obnoxious. I have one statement that says that they were unnamed candidates loudly declaring their status as candidates. Doesn't say who they were. I have another piece of paper. Well, let me finish what I'm saying.
You misread that. Didn't it name them and unnamed candidates?
My way was blocked by several candidates in the hallway and in the electronic voting room, loudly declaring their status as candidates, both
Sorry.
before and
I thought
after
that
they
was my
voted.
statement. You're reading
I
Got it.
wouldn't make stuff up.
I just-
And then the third statement I've got has the same thing, which is I observed several candidates in the hallway and in the electronic room loudly declaring their status as candidates, both before and after they voted. The problem is, there's no one named here. The only candidates who are named are the candidates you've named here, saying that they were physically there and that they had to be removed. And voters were disgusted or intimidated by their outbursts, which is not electioneering, as it's defined. And then a statement from Judy Price naming these people, causing a disruption. Now, logically, I'm going to say, well, it's probably the same people. But I don't have a statement here saying that Patrice Berlin was announcing her candidacy, Eric Grievance was announcing his candidacy, and Patrick Lewis was announcing his candidacy. I can guess that they're the same people, but that's something we have to discuss here.
Yeah,
And I can ask you, were those the same people? Since I'm here, I'm going to ask you. Were those people I just named, those three people named in the statement, were they loudly declaring their candidacy?
since we, meaning
Just
me
yes or no,
and.
were they loudly declaring,
Pardon
what
me?
he just said? Were
Sorry.
they loudly declaring their candidacy, yes or no?
I was answering that question. Everybody involved in this challenge, me and the witnesses that you have statements from, saw the same people. It wasn't like other people showed up and behaved like the people that we named did at various times. It was them. I named them. My witnesses chose, for whatever their own reasons, not to name them, but I guarantee you, they were referring.
Right, so that's
But it
my
was,
question. Oh, that-
and it was one incident, because you were all witnessing the same thing, right?
It was a single incident, but it kind of ebbed and flowed.
All right, so I'm going to ask you just one final question. In your complaint, your online complaint you filed, you mentioned Eric Creven and Patrice Berlin. Were they in that room declaring their candidate status as
Yes.
candidate? Thank you.
Okay, now, I'd like to just comment relative to
Do you have
the
a
logic
rebuttal?
that you were applying. Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
okay. I was very clear about who I saw and what they did. The other people who were, and first of all, to me, even if I didn't have a witness, that should be persuasive. But if it isn't, you can draw a very logical line from what I saw and who I named to the other people who witnessed the same thing, took the time to write about it, chose not to name the culprits.
Well, then why do you want it? Do you get a rebuttal?
Yes, I do. So, just so it's put in proper perspective, Mr. Previn came to the poll to complain about a problem, and he actually got in a confrontation with the person who was at the door to the online room. And this is an email from her, and it's in your challenge.
I'm sorry, can I speak for
It's
myself?
in your challenge 25, and it says,
He's rebuttaling. You need to-
and it says, I stepped inside the electronic voting room to see what was going on, and Mr. Previn looked at me, and as he took a step towards me, and we were standing less than 2 feet apart, and in a very loud voice said to me, "You people need to," at which point I tried to cut him off and explain to him that I was not you people, and that I was a volunteer and a neighbor. He spoke over me to repeat himself, and regrettably, I replied with, "I'm not you people, I'm an effing volunteer and neighbor." At which point, he started yelling that I told him to F off. And I'll let you read the rest in the challenge, but it's our position that this was instigated and elevated by a poll worker who, quite honestly, and I'll take responsibility as the overall person, should have been removed from the poll at that very point.
All right, now we're gonna do public comment. So who wants to do public comment? This is your chance to speak.
Well, I'm the next challenge, so I can
Okay,
address
go
it in the next challenge within the context of that, or I can
Yeah, no, just
Okay,
wait for yours, please.
Go ahead and,
Mr. Miller indicated that it was orderly and fairly peaceful, and nothing was orderly and peaceful. It was difficult walking in the door, the foyer was confusing, there was no one to guide you through the process. There were rude people at the tables, it was difficult to figure out where to get your forms. I will say that, and that was in the foyer, in the actual voting room, it was extremely crowded. And I think that those poll workers were doing their very best in a very difficult situation. But I didn't see any hostile activity or any electioneering, and I would have been very sensitive to that. I've been in politics for 37 years, and my nose would have turned up at that. I don't like stuff that stinks.
okay, who else wants to make a public comment?
That's it on this one.
Well,
Yeah.
first of all, I'd like to say that I object to the fact that since Jay was at the polling place and causing, in my opinion, a lot of these problems, how is he the person that's here representing Dunn? So, that being said, everything is being blamed on the neighborhood council way of voting. We've been doing it since 2008. The whole entire election process, everything about it was messed up. Our people, all of our stakeholders who were coming to the polls were already upset, but that's no excuse for a candidate to stand in a room, say another candidate's name, start yelling and screaming. Whatever the poll worker said, that's not, even if she was dismissed, okay, but that can't be just allowable, absolutely not. The other people, all of the other candidates were constantly in the 100 feet. I was told that I could not go anywhere inside the 100 feet, and I never did. So it's either you can't be in the 100 feet, or you can be. And if you're standing inside the poll, and you're told 2 or 3 times that you have to leave, we don't know what anybody is saying. You have to presume that people know they're the candidate. So it's you need to presume that they are not allowed to be in there.
Okay. I, with Jay Handel, measured the 100-foot radius. And we actually did it more than once, and he was very careful with measuring the 100-foot radius. And the majority of the candidates stayed outside that 100-foot radius. But I witnessed certain candidates inside that 100-foot radius. I was not inside the building, so on the walkway inside the 100-foot radius. I'm not talking about inside the building because I was outside the 100-foot radius, so I couldn't see what happened inside the walls. I saw other candidates inside the 100-foot radius, well within 25 and 40 feet, one of them being Patrice Berlin, in that 100-foot radius. Either the 100-foot, we all have to stand outside the 100-foot radius, or we don't. It's not fair to now come and interpret, oh, but you had to be not inside the 100-foot radius and not be talking about it. That wasn't the rule. Either the rule is we're all outside the 100-foot or we're not. And these candidates were not. And some people chose to name them. I named mine. Stu knew who it was. He named his. I could only see the one because I saw two others, but one of them wasn't elected, so there's no consequence. So I saw that happen. I cannot speak to anything with respect to Mr. Previn because I saw him go into the building, but I have no idea what happened after that. But he's allowed to go into vote. That's a proper thing for him to be able to do. So I speak nothing to him. I only can speak to Patrice Berlin, who was within that. And there was another candidate who was within that wasn't elected. And Patrick Lewis is the other candidate who was within that 100-foot radius more than one time. That's all I can say. And they were definitely speaking, they were handing out their literature. I mean, how is that not electioneering? But could we hear what was said? No, I could not hear, standing dutifully outside my 100-foot radius. I could not hear.
And there was no monitor outside.
And there was no monitor. And I did complain about this, to our IEA who was doing the curbside voting. And he did address it with the candidate on 2 occasions. And he did tell me that he had addressed it with the candidate. So that's what happened.
You see, this is where I'm like bothered, because what you're saying, I mean, they tell us you can't do this, and then it's like this whole thing, even with the other stuff, I'm bothered, but, I get, you're told and you follow the rules, but.
Our
I didn't say
election,
anything.
many of the seats are very close.
And especially if they're so close, I mean, they, and, regardless of you being able to hear what they're saying, if they're handing paper, that's a problem. I mean, I get it, but I follow the rules.
Yes.
Follow the rules. We would appreciate you following the rules.
This one's a definite, yeah. So I'm assuming that Patrice and Eric and, what's the other one?
Patrick?
They all made it onto the board.
Yes,
How close was the vote? I mean, for them?
Very close.
5 or 6
Jay,
votes.
5 or 6 votes?
No. Once the provisional were done, it was more than 5 or 6 votes. I would say it was 12 votes.
Was outside of 10%.
There was at least 12 votes.
How many votes?
12, at least 12 votes. Jay, you
There were-
have to
there were-
call
there were
really
three-
well done.
there were-
I don't wanna know, wait, hold
There were
on.
351 registrations at the poll, there were 50 some odd, we just showed it, for online voting. So approximately 420
I have it here.
in that area.
No, what I wanna know is,
bringing it
this
to
is
you.
what I wanna know.
The canvas of votes?
The votes that the person won by, how many did they win by? By 3 votes, by 4 votes, by 6 votes?
It's here, it's here. This is the canvas of votes that I have. This is what Jay did, this is the paper that signed that day. So here's the difference. I don't know that this is the final, this has the final printed one, Jay, on it.
Okay.
So they really won by like very little votes?
Yes.
narrow margin.
12,
Yeah, they're
the
narrow.
margins were narrow, 12 votes, maybe my recollection is that on the at-large, it was like 25 or more votes, the final one, when the
Guys,
provisionals
excuse
were
me,
counted.
the difference in votes doesn't really matter.
It does, because
No,
one
it
of
doesn't.
the rules
It
is
does.
they
No, it
have to
doesn't.
be,
Listen to
it
me.
has to have a
It does.
consequence.
Those two
Excuse me,
candidates should be
Okay,
disqualified.
Excuse me, we're
Are we
talking.
ready now?
He-
Discuss this?
Yeah,
I am
we're
ready.
ready. So, I think they should be like, I mean, that's too close, I mean, that.
Well, here are my thoughts, and then everybody else, or you can go first. Here are mine, is that I'm going by the done election manual, because we are not attorneys. On the section that says election challenges, I'm just going to tell you what I'm considering. Item number 5 is the supporting documentation must prove that the alleged challenge is not only valid, but would also have made a difference in the election outcome. So number 1, I'm thinking that 2 candidates being assholes in the voting room is not going to gain them more votes. Two candidates being jerks in the voting room, I don't think is gaining them votes. I'm referring to the same piece of paper you have where it states election challenges. One of the things required in the written request is that the supporting documentation must prove that the alleged challenge is not only valid, but would also have made a difference in the election outcome. But I'm not done. Challengeable is electioneering. Not challengeable is voter intimidation. So electioneering, as defined by the Admin Code, Section 815, includes lots of things which are normal electioneering, which is asking for a vote, nor shall any person or persons loiter on the premises while the polling place is open. I think...
No loitering.
Let me... Yeah, that's what I said, so let me finish. I haven't reached the end of my road yet.
He likes to
So,
hear himself talk.
I do. That's the only reason I'm involved. Is the free audience. I'm thinking out loud, which I do.
Which is good.
So my recommendation is that since they were named twice in the original challenge, only 2 names are in the original challenge, the same 2 names show up in a witness statement, and we have a representation here that the same people who are unnamed in the witness statements that actually allege electioneering are Patrice Berlin and Eric Previn. I'm going to recommend that we uphold the challenge, but issue a stern letter of warning. I don't think it rises to the level
What
of
is that?
No, I
disqualifying.
think they should be disqualified. Come on, dude, like, seriously, they can be inside, that's electioneering. Like, this is the problem with this whole, like, we're told you can't do certain things. They should not be within that 100 feet. I get it, them being, being disruptive is another thing, but them handing papers out to everybody, this is what people do. You
Well,
hand
there's
out
nothing in here about
papers.
handing out
Okay, I
But
agree
that's part of
with,
their,
I agree with the chair, and I believe they should be disqualified, those 2.
yeah,
Is
there
that
we
the
go,
vote?
that's a
It
vote.
sounds like a 2-to-1 vote.
2-to-1 vote.
So those 2 people will be disqualified.
What's the motion again?
So the 2 first people,
So sustained?
Patrice and
Eric,
Eric, they're gonna be only those 2 people would be
disqualified.
disqualified, not Louis, because he was only 1 time. There you go. Where's this gonna be on CNN?
2 to 3.
No, based on,
Electioneering.
Electioneering.
and the 2 you get where the Monica.
Me and her.
So does that, you got that, just in case it,
We're on CNN.
yeah. So it's challenge number 23. The vote was 2-to-1 to uphold the challenge. And based on the definition of electioneering which is provided to us.
Right.
Excuse me, but the vote was 3-0. You voted as well, but you had a different consequence in mind. Isn't that correct?
No, he voted to write a letter, we voted to disqualify.
You know what, I don't think we should respond to that. So let's,
It's all right, let's move
It's like
forward.
ecological.
All right, next thing.
Challenge number 25.